Those of you who watch this channel know that I tend not to wade into the culture war. Some of you have requested that I do so, but there are a number of reasons why that probably will never happen regularly. One of the reasons is that it's a saturated market, especially among right-of-center content creators. Granted, I'm not exactly in that lane, but I feel a solid amount of my audience already gets that sort of content from other larger YouTubers. It's a crowded field, and I just don't see myself doing as good of a job as the regulars. The second, and far more important reason why I don't talk about the culture war, and a big reason why I don't think I'd be good at it, is that frankly, I hardly care. I just cannot bring myself to write a script for a video that I'm really not interested in making. As a political YouTuber, I'm regularly told by people that I should care about the culture war. After all, in case you haven't heard, politics is downstream from culture. I've heard that cliche attributed to Ben Shapiro, who I do believe subscribes to it, but it was actually coined by Andrew Breitbart. In fact, it was originally called the Breitbart Doctrine. Whenever I hear somebody say this, I ask them to explain what they think it means. I get a pretty wide range of answers. Some people genuinely do think that if we watched the right movies and listened to the right music, we'd no longer needlessly subsidize ethanol. More often, though, people define both culture and politics so broadly that it's damn near a tautology. They essentially define culture as our values and politics as an extension of our values. If that's what you mean, then it certainly has merit. I don't believe this is why the expression has gotten so much traction, though. For what it's worth, I've never denied that culture has important political implications. In fact, I've talked about some of them on this channel before. I would also argue that it goes the other way. Politics frequently affects culture. Thomas Sowell has written about this, especially about how the welfare state has changed our culture. Ultimately, though, politics is downstream from culture, has gotten such wide circulation because it's vague and it sounds smart. So naturally, people just repeat it as if its truth is self-evident. In the end, though, its simplicity is also its downfall. Politics and its relationship with culture is more complicated than that. And that's another reason why the expression has gotten so much traction. It lets people pretend that something complicated is far more simple than it actually is, which allows anyone to have a relevant opinion on it. Back in 2019, Noah Rothman wrote a book about identity politics titled Unjust: Social Justice and the Unmaking of America. Rothman is a conservative, and his book is largely railing against what we would now call woke culture and its adherents, though he does take shots at white identity politics as well. The fifth chapter, called Entry-Level Politics, is the part of the book that interested me the most. In this chapter, and in other blog posts he's written regarding the topic, Rothman argues that one of the driving forces behind woke identity politics is that the people discussing these things get to LARP as if they're talking about more substantive issues. As Rothman wrote back in 2015, too often, and mostly on the left, opinion readers are privy not to profound argumentation, clever prose, and a depth of insight, but to the establishment of genetic legitimacy and facile condemnation of obscurities. As though the opinion journalism sphere were little more than a small claims court, modern opinion bloggers occupy their time tilting at windmills of minor empirical value. What's more, this process often mandates the writer inflate the gravity of their subject to absurd proportions, if only to retroactively validate holding such a strong opinion on matters so trifling. And you know what? This is a wildly successful approach to opinion journalism. It's entry-level political opinion. One need not have a profound historical understanding or a background in the social sciences to have a fully formed outlook on why a particular shirt or a Marvel Comics film adaptation could be construed as offensive. Nor would anyone care if that were merely a subjective objection. Those grievances must be framed as oppressive in the extreme, and objectively so. People enjoy consuming this form of political opinion for the same reason some like to write about it. There is no barrier to entry in order to read, understand, and draw your absolute and self-righteous conclusion on the banal transgression at issue. You see, here in the United States, among a certain subculture, it's seen as a good and virtuous thing to be an informed voter. Politics is the business of serious adults. Great minds talk about ideas, average minds talk about events, and small minds talk about people, as a former First Lady once said. Talking about sports or celebrity gossip is what unserious people talk about. Politics and policy is what big boys and big girls talk about. Those of you who watch this channel know that I don't believe that. I think that Americans are rationally ignorant. But I think it's fair to say that this is the general attitude amongst a certain portion of the country. Of course, actually learning about these supposedly important things and having anything relevant to say about them is a difficult process, as these issues are inherently complicated. So, in order to satisfy the feeling and perception that they're doing this, people often go for cheap substitutes. Cable news is a great example of this. It looks like something very serious, and they're ostensibly talking about important subjects, and sometimes they even do. More often than not, though, it's usually just superficial commentary and outrage porn. There's a reason its nickname is infotainment. I think a lot of self-proclaimed policy wonks here online offer another substitute. People don't watch these channels for actual in-depth policy analysis from genuine experts. They watch them to feel like that's what they're doing. You can find actual deep dives here on YouTube from people who genuinely know what they're talking about. But very few people actually watch that sort of thing. No, most people prefer to go to Dunning-Kruger pundits who offer up gross oversimplifications with the veneer of complexity. These people are not there to break down complicated policies, they are there to make people believe that our complicated world is actually simple. And finally, as Rothman argues, a lot of the woke stuff that so many people loathe here online is another substitute. It's people playing activist and pretending to make statements about racial and gender dynamics in society. As Rothman writes, from movies to comic books, from monuments to the faces that grace American currency, social justice crusades only mimic politics. They require little expertise or background knowledge. All that is required to weigh in on them and to be taken seriously by the self-appointed gatekeepers of elevated political discourse is a marginalized identity. I agree with Rothman, but I would add to his analysis that so much of the response to the woke stuff is also entry-level politics. In 2019, I responded to Rothman when he tweeted out an article about entry-level politics, saying, I believe that entry-level politics can explain a lot of the backlash to social justice as well. There are a lot of keyboard warriors out there who think that they're saving Western civilization by making fun of BuzzFeed articles. Rothman liked the tweet, so he just might agree with it. I was really into the anti-SJW content during much of its heyday. The vast majority of the content was somewhat edgy people making fun of and pissing off annoying, overzealous social justice warriors. That was all well and good. It was a saturated market for sure, but it was fun. However, there were some people in that community who took things just a little too seriously. If you watched Lawrence Southern's 2-hour and 51-minute video titled The Whole Truth, she talks about how she thought she was part of a community dedicated to saving the West.
I'm almost embarrassed sometimes looking back at it, but because so many people that I worked with in politics didn't actually believe in any of the politics that they spoke about. It was kind of an aesthetic. A lot of people who didn't make it in acting kind of got into politics and learned the talking points they had to say. And I was fully bought in from the start. I believed this was a civilizational battle for the heart of the West.
A lot of these people were LARPing at it, according to her, but some of them genuinely thought they were rescuing Western civilization and liberal values with their YouTube channels. All of it was a LARP, as far as I'm concerned. By the way, before you leave a stupid comment about how I'm a YouTuber, you must understand that I'm under no such illusions that I'm changing the world, much less doing something important here. I do this purely because I enjoy doing it. These people almost exclusively focused on culture war stuff, and when criticized for not being a little more substantive, I mean Western civilization was at stake, surely we couldn't waste time on trivial matters, the response invariably was, politics is downstream from culture. They were talking about the important, consequential stuff. Again, I have to say, I do believe that culture matters, but in practice, I think the big reason why these people took on the culture war, and one of the big reasons why it took off, is because it's just easier to discuss, and the audience has way more of an appetite for it because it's easier to digest. The trick is to make it look like you're talking about something way more important and serious. It's why every single anti-SJW channel back in the day made a video about the wage gap.
The wage gap is simply the average earnings of men and women working full-time. It does not count for different job positions, hours worked, or different jobs. It has nothing to do with the same job. It has nothing to do with discrimination.
The idea that women only earn a percentage of what men do is an erroneous talking point, and it is pervasive. I mean, President Obama was saying this at one point.
Over the course of her career, a working woman with a college degree will earn, on average, hundreds of thousands of dollars less than a man who does the same work.
That said, did we really need 500,000 videos debunking this? Would we still have been able to save Western civilization if we only had 400,000? I don't know. But anti-SJWs got to make some easy content by rehearsing the same argument they heard from someone else. And the creator and everyone watching got to pretend that the whole thing was about economics, when it was really just about owning the feminists. Somehow, I doubt the vast majority of these people could tell you anything about economics that they didn't originally hear from somebody else. When you're a content creator, you're regularly asked by your audience what your opinions are on a whole host of topics. It's flattering that people care enough about your opinions that they want to know what you think about other topics. The problem is, you frequently get asked to opine on issues you don't know anything about. When faced with this, the creator can either admit to not knowing much about it, and hence not having anything relevant to say, or they can bluff their way through an answer. Most choose the latter. I've seen so many YouTubers talk out their ass on a subject they know nothing about. I'm ashamed to say that I've done it myself. What the more sophisticated culture warriors tend to do is take whatever subject they happen to be asked about and bring it back to some culture war issue that they usually talk about and establish a tenuous connection between the two. This is the reality behind a lot of politics as downstream from culture discourse. The most egregious example I've ever seen of this is Charlie Kirk talking about inflation. Charlie Kirk is definitely a culture war guy, and he's extremely popular in that regard. Charlie is not very smart, but back in April, that didn't stop him from trying to explain inflation.
When you start to indulge in the belief that you could become whatever you want and reality is subjective, not objective, you're going to have ramifications that nobody anticipated or intended. So there's a direct connection to inflation and the trans issue. You say, Charlie, come on, they couldn't be further apart. No, they're exactly the same. They're the same in this aspect. When you believe that men can become women, why wouldn't you also believe that you could print wealth? If you believe that someone can change their gender, why wouldn't you also believe that money is wealth?
So let's start with the obvious. There is absolutely, positively, no reason to believe that there's any connection between these two things. There isn't even correlation. Inflation goes up and down, here in the United States as it does everywhere. Transgender people have been around for a long time, but the issue of transitioning really only became a big thing in American culture after Caitlyn Jenner appeared on the front of Vanity Fair in 2015. We did not see a spike in inflation after that. It wasn't until 2021, after we had shut down significant portions of the economy for months and printed money like crazy, that we saw inflation start to rise. People have always believed things that are not true throughout world and American history. There's no correlation between false beliefs and inflation. If this somehow followed, are we to believe that deflation happens when people believe things that are true? I would love to ask Charlie that. Also, it's not like inflation is this big mystery. We have a pretty good explanation for why it happens. It is a monetary phenomenon. Charlie Kirk doesn't know anything about monetary policy, nor does he have anything relevant to say about it. Nor, I'm guessing, does his audience want to hear anything about monetary policy. And I can't blame them. Monetary policy is boring, and it's not easy. The problem is, inflation is an important issue, and it's a topical one at that. I get that people have strong feelings about the transgender issue, but for the vast majority of the population, inflation is way more likely to affect your day-to-day life, and your future. So I think it's safe to say that inflation is more important in the grand scheme of things. So Charlie feels the need to talk about it. Unfortunately, actually learning enough to say something relevant about the actual subject would require hard work, and payoff in terms of engagement from his audience probably wouldn't be as high. So rather than doing his homework, Charlie goes to something that he does like to talk about, and that has a much lower barrier to entry. And he establishes a laughably tenuous connection to act like one thing has something to do with the other. That way, Charlie can pretend that he's talking about something more important than it is. And his audience can pretend that they're listening to something more important than it is. Now, I have to be 100% clear here. I am not saying that you should only spend your time considering very important issues. Again, I believe in rational ignorance. If you don't know what that is, look it up. Nor am I saying that I only occupy my time with very serious subjects. The supposedly serious subjects I do talk about, I only talk about them because I'm interested in them, not because they are serious. I also spend lots of my time talking about things that are objectively inconsequential. Those of you who watch this channel know that I love YouTube drama. What I cannot tolerate, though, is someone trying to pretend that something relatively inconsequential is way more important than it actually is. This is entry-level politics, and this is so much of what people mean when they say that politics is downstream from culture.